there are some ethical reasons why horizontal inequality is clearly even worse than vertical inequality, because vertical, you can claim that, hey, I'm rich because I'm so good, right? But here we are looking at some groups of people who there's no apparent genetic reason for being better or putting in better effort or making better choices, who seem to be doing poorly. I am Amitava Dutt, professor of economics and political science at the University of Notre Dame, and also professor of economics at Flaxo in Ecuador. Traditionally, the heterodox models coming from what you might call classical Marxian or post-Keynesian Kaleckian usually focus on the rich and the poor in terms of workers and capitalists. That is, workers are usually those who just work, have nothing to lose but their chains, and capitalists are those who are these exploiters, let us say, who own the means of production and supervise workers. But of course, the world is more complicated than this simple story. So one needs to take into account in a poor and rich in a more sort of subtle way, to take into account different things that different groups do. So I think it is still important to focus on the rich and the poor. And by that I don't mean there's no middle class, but at least in that paper, what I wanted to focus on was the top, those who call themselves the best, okay? Because we are the best, we are at the top, right? And the rest, okay? The rest means the 99%, let us say. I mean, these numbers are, of course, artificial. So what do these do? Well, the workers, or the 99%, are not just workers. Many of them own pension funds. They own capital. They have bank deposits. They get returns. Whereas the rich, the tops, so to speak, are not just this amorphous capitalist, the bosses, so to speak, but what do they do, in fact? There was a paper by Steve Margolin a while back about what do bosses do, okay? So I don't think we can answer that question very clearly, but they do many things, okay? Partly they organize production, they manage, they supervise, partly they're financiers, partly they just sit there with inherited wealth and make lots of money. Say you're looking at vertical inequality of income. So there are some people who are very rich, some people who are very poor, and there's whole distribution like that. So for example, Gini coefficient is a way of measuring vertical inequality. So the way you rank people is the way you look at inequality. The same criteria for ranking is the criteria for which inequality is looked at. Horizontal, however, looks at different groups, not anybody who is high ranked or low ranked, but some relevant groupings, and look at how these different groups actually have different levels of well-being in some sense. So for instance, it probably makes sense to call capitalists and workers as horizontal groups, because it's not clear that, it's possible that workers are very rich and capitalists are very poor. So that is a horizontal grouping, and then of course we know that's not the way it is. Mostly capitalists, or whoever can be called capitalists, are richer. So another very important thing is ethnicity, okay? Different ethnic groups. Sometimes minorities may be very rich in one place, and another place minorities may be very poor. Gender, race, and all these things can be looked at in this way, which haven't been done enough, I think. I've been thinking about what concepts could replace these concepts of individual and rationality, and I've now think that a very useful way of thinking about the economy and of society in general is in terms of three concepts: uncertainty, power, and institutions. Most decisions that people make, these all have implications that we know nothing about. And this is the idea of uncertainty. What we do is we form institutions to solve these problems. Not just organizations, that's one aspect of that, but also shared habits and ideas. And these shared ideas can change. Change doesn't happen in a vacuum, it reacts to power. Everybody has some power. Its power is never uncontested, right? And how does power exert itself? Through money, sometimes through violence, sometimes through education. That is, you teach people to think in certain ways. Finance, that is, Money can be high income, but also finance can be a very important source of power. Who has the ability to get other people's money and to control it, right? So money comes in multiple ways. And by information and knowledge, I mean not only the education system, but the media. Why is power so important? Well, it's important because these different groups actually don't exactly know what's going to happen in the future. If there was some objective of knowing what's going to happen, then we could always figure out what is the best for us, right? But uncertainty creates these many different ways of framing what is likely to happen. Horizontal groups have some commonality. The whole idea that Marx focused on was the rich and poor are not automatically going to sort of join together, right? It's the workers who are poor who actually are brought together in factories, who can share a common fate, for example, in terms of political organization. Even in civil wars in low-income countries, you find that inequality of the horizontal kind is much more likely to lead to conflict, even violence, because people have some commonality and some feeling of common identity. I think the problem with inequality in many countries is that's very severe. As we know, the U.S. inequality has been increasing compared to the last, 40 years or so, but it is not creating the kind of backlash, and I hope it's not a violent backlash, but at least a democratic one, is that there doesn't seem to be a clear horizontal identity of these people. On the other hand, there are other kinds of non-identities being created by people who at the top say, well, you're different, you're black or you're white, you're a man or you're a woman, or your ethnic groups are different. So they can be played in ways that of division, but the idea is to find out unifying ideas to create a horizontal identity, so to speak, which can actually cause socio-political change.